Well, I can't thank you enough on behalf of everyone here that you've made the trip up with so much going on in Washington.
It's wonderful to be here.
Washington, Nantucket. It's a tough choice on a weekend like this.
It's much harder trying to do the Lord's work in the city of Satan today than it was when I first came.
Let me kick off with a very strange question. Can you put up the one slide I gave you? I find this fascinating. My son Rob emailed this to me 2 weeks ago, and he said, "Dad, this needs no explanation." For me, most things need an explanation, but this didn't. And if you take a look at this, Senator, you have Time magazine. In Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, Vladimir Putin on the cover. In Asia, Vladimir Putin on the cover. In the South Pacific, Vladimir Putin on the cover. In the United States, it's time to pay for college athletes. We have Washington, we have Syria, we have Russia, we have a Republican Party that needs something. We have all these issues that we're dealing with, immigration, education. Is it time to pay for college athletics?
Well, of that conglomerate, I think it's true that People magazine far outsells Time magazine. It's just reality, and they're in the business. They're in the business to make money, and I think they made an editorial decision that they would probably sell more magazines with that on the cover than, and obviously in their overseas editions that my pal Vlad was on the. I tweeted one time, "Dear Vlad, the Arab Spring is coming to a neighborhood near you." I got several thousand tweets back in Russian, so I had a guy from the Library of Congress come over to translate them for me, and I really regret it. Finding out about some of my private habits and my family and how anyway, but not long ago, Vladimir Putin said that John McCain was the biggest, Chechnya and John McCain were his biggest problem. So I'm very proud that Vlad is, Vlad has been paying attention to me. Many of you don't know, but he wrote, I'm sure you saw the thing in the New York Times that he wrote the piece where he said that America was not an exceptional nation, among other things. And so I was able to get a thing in the old Pravda, and he was asked about it, and he said that he wanted to invite me to Russia to a discussion forum. And I'll be looking, I'm sure the invitation is in the mail, but he's an interesting man, and I think we really ought to understand who he is, and that is a colonel, KGB, who has a vision for the old Russian Empire. And he wants to exert influence in the world. World's 13th largest economy, by the way, that far outstrips the real influence that he should have. And he has now been able, because this latest Syria events about Syria, now been able to insert himself in the Middle East in a way that he had not Russia since 1973, when Anwar Sadat decided to kick out all the Russians out of Egypt. It's very interesting what he's been able to achieve in the last few weeks.
So since the Iranian Revolution in 1979, we had the President of the United States and the President of Iran speaking last evening. Your thoughts on that and bringing us up to date on where we stand?
My thoughts are that anything that could reduce tensions, and particularly the threat of Iranian acquiring nuclear weapons, which they are closer to every day, which the President of the United States has said is unacceptable, then we should explore that avenue and explore it with all vigor and effort. But I think it's important to point out that Mr. Rouhani was the negotiator in previous years, between 2000 and 2004, at the talks for nuclear talks concerning Iran. He later wrote and spoke how he was so proud that he had deceived the negotiators, and they had gone from 150 centrifuges to 1,000 while he was their negotiator. I would like to see us demand that Iran comply with 4 National Security Council resolutions, one of which is to stop enriching, because they are getting very close. You notice that the Israelis were very skeptical about this. Of course, they're the ones that have been said, that the Iranians have said they will wipe off the map. So what we need to do is have some concrete agreement that would be a part of the process to really resolve this issue. The Iranians are getting closer and closer to the acquisition of a nuclear weapon. And what the Israelis fear is they get right next to it. In other words, just the turning of a screw, a few tweaks, and they've got the nuclear weapon. And what the Israelis fear is they get right next to it and then stop. And they feel that's a threat to the state of Israel, and I think there's some legitimacy to that concern. But we all want these talks to succeed when they begin. We all want this threat removed, but I do agree with the President that a nuclear-armed Iran is really a very serious destabilizing influence in the Middle East.
Senator, switch to Washington. Larry Summers touched on something last evening, which is the yearning we have to find people that can get us back to the center, back to doing deals, back to making agreements, less extreme, less fighting as an ideal. I look at one of my favorite senators of all time, Olympia Snowe, who's now no longer in the Senate, was a real force for trying to find agreement in the center. You've become that person today, which I admire incredibly. But can you tell us, do you feel comfortable there? Do you have many others that you're gonna you feel can be helpful?
I'll try to be brief, but I am a proud conservative. I'm proud of my record as a conservative. I'm proud of Ronald Reagan's record as a conservative. But as Chris Matthews described to you earlier, that he and Tip O'Neill were able to sit down when Social Security was in crisis and come to an agreement and walk out together in the Rose Garden and announce to the American people that they had reached an agreement. So it's not so much your philosophy as it is your willingness to preserve principle and at the same time achieve compromise. Look, my friends, we could, in this meeting today, sit down and write down on the back of an envelope what it takes to resolve this debt crisis that is approaching. We all know what it is. We know that it's increasing revenues, and we also know it's reform of entitlements. How exactly you get to the details of that is something that might take some time. But there's going to have to be that compromise. Social Security is going to go broke. Medicare is going to go broke. The tax code is completely screwed up. It's this high. Please raise your hand if there's anyone here who understands our tax code. And so we all know that if we closed loopholes, if we simplified it, and we made it so that Americans can understand it, and about that thick, that we would be able to resolve this issue. But neither side wants to touch one or the other. And at some point, we are going to have to. So I don't consider myself a moderate. I consider myself a proud conservative. But I also think that when immigration reform is an issue that has to be addressed, I'm eager to sit down with 3 other Republicans and 4 Democrats and come up with a comprehensive immigration reform that I think is the best thing for America. Did I make some compromises in those negotiations? Yes. But did we achieve the goal that all 8 of us sought, which we know is what needs to be done if we're going to take 11 million people out of the shadows and fulfill our nation's, my view, mission as a Judeo-Christian nation, that we will take these people and give them an opportunity to do what I don't see any Native Americans in the crowd here, that our forebears were able to do when they came here. So, I will do that time after time. And I want to make one other thing clear. I have an excellent relationship with the President of the United States. We fought each other in 2008, and after I lost, I slept like a baby. Sleep 2 hours, wake up and cry. Sleep 2 hours. but I have an excellent relationship with the President of the United States. We work together on immigration reform. We've had many discussions on how we can address this debt issue. We've talked about many other issues together. And so please understand that I think we only have one president, and when we're going to talk about some of the issues we're talking about, we should do everything that we can to help him. But that does not mean that I agree with him on a number of aspects of national security policy. So what we need to do is have our constituents say that they approve of what we do. And how do you do that? You reach a consensus. Right now, in case you missed it, the approval rating of Congress is 12%. Have you seen that? We're down to paid staffers and blood relatives. I can't.
That's lower than bankers.
Worse. We were at Kennedy Airport this morning. A guy runs up to me and says, "Hey," said, "anybody ever tell you look a lot like Senator John McCain?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Doesn't it sometimes just make you mad as hell?" So we seek approval. We seek approval from our constituents. How are we going to get that approval? And it seems to me it's by sitting down together and reaching conclusions and reaching compromises that the American people may not like in its entirety, but addresses these looming issues which are threatening our children and our grandchildren's futures that we all know about.
The senator has asked me to make sure that we take some questions. So in a few minutes, I'm going to ask for questions just so you have a minute to think about what you might want to ask. But before then, Senator, I had an opportunity to be with you a few weeks ago when we walked by a row of pictures of some of the greatest leaders in the United States. And it was very interesting to me that there's also a picture in the same group of Lee Kuan Yew, the father of modern Singapore. And you just pointed at him and said, that's leadership. Tell me.
Probably the two wisest men that I have, men or women that I have encountered in my life. One is Henry Kissinger, and the other was Lee Kuan Yew. Not only are they geniuses in their own right as far as their intellect is concerned, but the trick is to explain things in a way that ordinary human beings can understand them. If Henry were here and you asked him about Russia today, I think he would give you a degree of understanding that very few people can. If you asked him about China, who has the history that he does? Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore was an island. It's still an island. No natural resources, no nothing. Except it was an island that the Japanese had occupied all during World War II. Now look at it. How many of you have been to Singapore and seen the hundreds of ships waiting to be unloaded? The booming economy, the incredible capital that has moved into that country and made it an absolute miracle. Those things don't happen by accident. Lee Kuan Yew is, I still think, the wisest man, certainly about Asia Pacific, that I have met. And I asked him the last time I was with him, I said, what about China? And he said, the Chinese will build up their military, they're going to be nice to you, and they'll build up their military, and then they're going to tell you to get out of the South China Sea. They'll say, you can have the East China Sea, you can have the East, but we are going to have the West. It was very disturbing, what he had to say. And I'm disappointed that the Chinese have not acted in the role of a superpower with the majority that, with the maturity that goes with the status that they have achieved economically and are now moving very heavily into militarization, and they have alienated or alarmed all of their neighbors in the region. We talk about the Middle East all the time, and that's understandable. But my friends, we should be paying a lot of attention to Asia Pacific, because that's where the world's economy has moved to. And what happens there will have profound effects in the 21st century.
Apropos of Tom Scott's comments on your service in the Vietnam War and so many people from my generation who grew up during that very difficult period, I had an opportunity a few years ago when Dr. Kissinger was hosting an event in Singapore to go to a very small event where Dr. Kissinger and Lee Kuan Yew sat and had a discussion, and it was incredible. And for someone who grew up in that time, what Lee Kuan Yew said, and it was about 12 or 14 Americans there of my generation, of Vietnam War, of all the concerns that came with that. And he said, you know, you don't understand in America that what happened during the Vietnam War prevented Asia becoming communist. And without some of the things that happened then, Singapore would not be here today. And I just find it a perspective that as an American who is conditioned in a very different way, it doesn't change everything, but it was very healthy to hear that perspective.
And it's somewhat comforting, but still a lot of people in this room don't remember as well as perhaps you and I do. That war tore this nation apart in a way that we had not been torn apart since the Civil War. And one of the reasons why John Kerry and I worked very hard on resolving the missing in action and POW issue and working with President Clinton, John Kerry and I, for a normalization of relations between ourselves and Vietnam was to help some of our veterans to come all the way home. We honor our veterans, no matter how you feel about Iraq or Afghanistan. We Americans honor our veterans. That was not the case with the Vietnam veterans. And I think it's a shameful aspect of our history, because these were 18, 19-year-old kids that got drafted and went and fought. And I have found that normalizing our relations after we had to resolve this missing in action issue, that these veterans, it helped them. And I guess looking back, I am as proud of that as I am of most anything that I was involved in. The Vietnamese are still a lousy government. They're still persecuting Buddhists and Christians and minorities, and I bang on them all the time. But they also have shown a lot of progress in a lot of ways. And I can't tell you the number of Vietnam veterans I've met that tell me that they've gone back, as I have so many times, back to Vietnam, taken their wives and children, and it's been a remarkable healing, and I think all of us should be proud of it, even if it was late.
Well, I'm just saying, so many of us in this room would feel the same way, that when you see how we all act when we have the opportunity to meet you, 5.5 years of torture in a prisoner of war camp in Vietnam, you crossed party lines in 1996 to join President Clinton to normalize relations to Vietnam. I think it kind of says the kind of man you are, Senator. It's amazing.
Thank you. Could we talk just a bit? I know that people are interested in what's going on in Washington.
Please, those next.
It's not good. Apparently, the House of Representatives today is sending back a bill concerning the continuing resolution that will be unacceptable to the Democrats. No matter where you are on the political spectrum, you fight as hard as you can, and you argue as honorably as you can, and when you lose, you understand you've lost, and you go on and fight another battle. When we took up, I'll call it Obamacare, and I know that's a little bit derisive, but that's what everybody knows. When we took up Obamacare in 2009, I was on the floor as much or more than anybody. We stretched it out, and we voted even on Christmas Eve morning. Then in 2012, the campaign, and part of the Romney campaign was repeal and replace Obamacare. Well, we lost. The American people spoke. So now, with the Republicans in charge in the House and the Senate and the presidency in the Democrat hands, some of my friends are expecting us to repeal Obamacare. Elections have consequences. Elections have consequences. That's how our government works. And for some of my Republican colleagues to say that we will hold out and we'll shut down the government and we'll have a repeal of Obamacare. I'll tell you when we will have a repeal. It's when we have 67 Republican votes in the United States Senate, because that's what it takes to override a presidential veto, and we ought to understand it. And so we're about to have this train wreck again that I saw in 1995, and the American people are going to be uncertain. Federal workers are not going to be sure about whether they're going to be working or not. It's going to probably disturb the markets a bit, and we're going to put them through this drama, and we are not going to repeal Obamacare. We are not, because that's what the democratic process is about. I'd love to, but the fact is we're not. So my friends are making a serious mistake, in my view, by trying to reverse the verdict of the American people. And so it's an unfortunate time, in my view, because it is splitting the Republican Party up. And I hate to see that. We're already in the minority in the Senate. We've already lost 2 presidential campaigns in a row, and we are now dividing Republicans against Republicans. And I regret that, and I wish it wouldn't happen. But we shouldn't subject the American people, particularly those who are dependent on some of the functions of government, to put their futures in jeopardy because we are in a fight in the halls of Congress. It's just not fair to them. So I guess what's going to happen is that this bill is going to come over. Maybe we'll go back in tomorrow or on Monday, and the Senate will not accept the bill that the House is going to send over, and we will be ping-ponging back and forth, and people will not know what is going to happen to them while we're going through this. The American people deserve better, and we should. There are some fixes that I think even my Democrat friends realize should be made in Obamacare. Any bill that large and that encompassing clearly has some things that need to be changed in it. And what we really should do is sit down. For example, I would repeal this tax on medical devices. It's had a devastating effect on the industry. It's caused industries to go to Europe. It's really something that we probably shouldn't have done. We should, on the provisions for both corporations and individuals, we should make them the same. There's a number of areas that I think we could get Republican and Democrat to agree to improve it. So it is what it is. I saw this in 1995. It didn't work then. And the American people will blame the Congress and not the president. That's just the way it is. Whether it's fair or not, that's not the point. And so I watch this with great interest. And I take some exception when some of my newer colleagues claim that none of us have really fought for what we believe in. I fought like hell. I lost. But I'm proud that I fought. And to somehow allege that some of us didn't is obviously not factually accurate. So, and then the question you will ask, why is it that some people are so hard over in both directions, both to the right and to the left? And frankly, my friends, a lot of it has to do with redistricting, because there are many Republicans who are in solid Republican districts, and there are many Democrats who are in solid Democrat districts, and they're basically in lifetime positions. And so they have a great deal of latitude in their voting and their positions, and that maybe sometime we ought to look at that as well.
We go to a question? Right here.
Senator McCain, I appreciate all you've done for America. Terrific. You know, if a business had a 12% approval rating of its customers, it would be out of business. There's a lot of competition for various businesses. Why don't we have that in government? I mean, we have the two parties, and they're sort of competing, but I'm starting to feel like it's a biopoly, duopoly, and we don't have that competition that sort of built America. What can you do to improve that, and how can you get Congress to start looking at us as your customers?
Well, one of it is, as I mentioned earlier, is redistricting. When people are put in solid districts that are overwhelming one party or another, then obviously the result is that. The second thing is that I happen to believe, and I'm sure it's because I'm totally biased, that the worst decision made by the United States Supreme Court in my lifetime is Citizens United, where what was known as McCain-Feingold was repealed. That has unleashed a flood of money that we don't know where it came, a lot of it came from. We don't know who's doing it. It is unbelievable, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. And the one thing I can promise you, there will be scandals. There will be scandals because you don't have that much money washing around elections unaccounted for, and nobody knows where it came from, then that there's going to be scandals. And then maybe we can go back to try to get some of this under control. That's one of the several problems that we have.
We've heard, I understand the problem with the redistricting, but we've heard a lot today about the power of leadership and the power of believing in miracles to change the unthinkable. And we've also actually have in the room all sorts of people that are powerful brand experts. Do you think there's any hope to create a counterweight to the Tea Party wing of the Republicans and the equivalent on the extreme left of a let's just compromise and get on with it party in the middle somewhere that the rest of us can really get behind? Because right now I find a lot of the calls that I get, the emails that are coming into my inbox, I don't like either of them. Because they're both, all the traffic is from the extremists.
Well, first of all, there was an experiment that was tried in the last couple of years, and it was called No Labels, and it didn't succeed. I think that there will have to be some elections in order to change it. But remember, the Tea Partiers succeeded because they were very dissatisfied with what was going on in Washington. They struck a nerve. They got a grassroots organization going, and they were successful in affecting a number of elections. They also, by the way, there were 5 Senate seats that would have been Republican, that there were Tea Party candidates, and we lost. So it certainly has been a mixed bag as far as results from the Tea Partiers are concerned. I've been going back and I've been looking at what caused the demise of the Whig Party. And that was that they lost touch with the American people on a couple of very big issues. And so I think you may see sometime or another an independent party that appeals to a broad section. In my state, and every state in America, but particularly mine, the new voters overwhelmingly are registering as independents. They're not registering as Republican or Democrat. So a larger and larger percentage of the electorate has expressed the views that have been expressed to you, and that is that they want to be independent and not Republican or Democrat. And finally, that you can't have so much dissatisfaction and so much disapproval without something happening politically. That's just the history of our country, and that's what representative government is all about. And I can't predict exactly how it's going to happen, but The largest manifestation of it we've seen so far is the dramatic increase in the independent voter. The independent voter now literally decides every statewide election in America, I guess with the exception of the People's Republic of Massachusetts.
One last question.
Thank you. Senator, you commented on a couple of national security issues. Could you comment on where we are in Syria and also on how we got there?
Thank you for asking that, and I'll try to be brief. Over 2 years ago, some young boys in Aleppo painted some graffiti on the wall, and Bashar Assad's people took them into the police station, tortured the daylights out of them, and beat them up and killed a couple. And that started demonstrations, which turned into armed conflict, which turned into now what is a regional conflict. And it was also probably part of the Arab Spring, this rising in the Middle East and throughout the world, by the way. The Arab Spring is misnamed in that respect, in my view. And it got larger and larger. A year ago, the Free Syrian Army had the advantage and they were winning. And then the Iranians played a very big hand, and they brought 5,000 Hezbollah, their client terrorist organization in Lebanon, into the fight. The Russians increased their arms supplies. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard came in big time on the ground, and the flow of weapons to Bashar Assad increased dramatically, including small uses of chemical weapons, which have been authenticated. Meanwhile, we basically did nothing. The first time a weapon by the United States of America has arrived to the Free Syrian Army was a couple of weeks ago. And so the momentum on the battlefield was changed in favor of Bashar Assad. The Russians have been extremely helpful to him as far as weapons are concerned, and of course the Iranians have played a very key role, which is something we ought to think about when we look at with a narrow view of the chemical weapons and the nuclear weapon negotiations with the Iranians. Meanwhile, into the fight comes these jihadists from all over the world, not just from all over the Middle East, but all over the world. These Muslim extremists, and they're growing stronger and stronger. And so at the same time, of course, the brutality has caused an exodus of Syrians, which is really destabilizing their neighbors. Now today, 20% of the population of Jordan are refugees. Can you imagine what the strain would be on our social services if 20% of our population were refugee? The hundreds of thousands have moved into Kurdistan, Jordan, Turkey, and if you've ever been to one of these refugee camps, it's one of the most depressing experiences you could ever have, because of the loss of hope that afflicts many people when they spend time in a refugee camp. So the King of Jordan says he can't last more than a year. Lebanon is being destabilized. Iraq is deteriorating to an alarming degree. There are now more killing going on in Iraq than any time since 2008. And so it's turning into a regional conflict: Sunni, Shia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Persian, Arab. It has really been very enlarged. And I can understand an argument against us being involved if we're just a civil war in Syria. It's no longer that. And if it continues to spread and destabilize the region, then it's obviously something that we care about from our national security interests. From a humane standpoint, can you imagine 1 million children are refugees? 1 million children? And what are the long-term consequences? I was in a refugee camp in Jordan. There was a young woman, school teacher. We were walking around the refugee camp, and she said, "Senator McCain, you see these children?" I said, "Yeah, there's children everywhere." She said, "These children are going to take revenge on those people they feel didn't help them and abandon them. You know what happened in the Palestinian refugee camps? It became a breeding ground for Islamic extremists. It's not in our interest to have 1 million children who want to take revenge on us as they grow up in these refugee camps. So all I can say is that, and I talked to General Idris this morning, the leader of the Free Syrian Army. It was a terrible blow to their morale because they were convinced that the President of the United States was going to have strikes against Bashar Assad. And they were prepared to launch some offensive as that happened. And they feel abandoned, but they're not giving up and they're not quitting. But there is a real threat of this continued inflow of jihadists. And by the way, these jihadists are being funded by very wealthy Saudis and very wealthy Kuwaitis and very wealthy Qatars. And they are funneling the money in and getting arms and weapons to these jihadist organizations. And so there's no good option now. But if there was a departure of Bashar Assad, which will not be while he thinks he's winning, I mean, that's obvious, then we would have to help put down these jihadists, help the Free Syrian Army, and we would also have to have some kind of arrangement, probably some international agreement, as we negotiated for his departure, to secure these chemical weapons sites. Now, will this agreement work that was just through the Security Council last night? I would point out that there is no provision in that agreement that requires military action against Bashar Assad if he doesn't cooperate. I hope it succeeds. But the Russians have said continuously 2 things. One, the rebels did, the Free Syrian Army did it, which of course is ludicrous. And second of all, that they would have to go back to the Security Council if it's proven that Bashar Assad has not complied, and Lavrov, who's one of the cunning, really wily guys I have ever encountered, says, well, you'd have to be 100% sure that Bashar Assad wasn't complying with the Security Council agreement. So we'll see what happens. I don't think it's going to work. I pray every night and every morning that it will work, because the human suffering that's going on is incalculable, And finally, I'd just like to say, I understand public opinion. I have town hall meetings all the time in Arizona. I know Americans don't want us there. My constituents don't want us there. They're weary because of Afghanistan and Iraq. They know they were not told the truth about weapons of mass destruction when we went into Iraq. We were not told the truth. There were not weapons of mass destruction there. So they are cynical, and they're tired of losing young Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I understand that. But I'd also point out that maybe those 1 million children that are refugees are a little war-weary too, and their mothers, and those who are being slaughtered as we speak. And finally, my friends, I'm a student of history. I will admit to not being the smartest guy in the world. But in the 1930s, terrible things happened. The Italians invaded a place called Abyssinia, and they used weapons of mass destruction. Hitler marched into Czechoslovakia, and the trains loaded with Jews went to the gas chambers. And we sat by and said, no, America's not going to be involved. By God, we're America firsters. And terrible things happen. Terrible things are happening right now. And some of us who understand that will continue to speak up. And if we lose, we lose. The American people and the President of the United States doesn't want to act, then I've done it. And my colleagues in the Congress who would not have voted for the resolution to attack Syria, they wouldn't have. But I still have to do what I believe is right, because I can't go into those refugee camps and tell those people that I'm not doing everything I can to alleviate the terrible suffering that they and their families have experienced and are experiencing. So I can only say that I believe that the United States of America is an exceptional nation. I believe that if we don't lead, that the bad people will lead. I believe that the United States of America has sacrificed our blood and treasure all over the world, all through the 20th century, usually in defense of somebody else's freedom. And I cannot be more proud of the United States and its people and what we have done for the world. And I do believe, unlike my friend Vlad, America is an exceptional nation, and all of us can be very proud of it.
Senator John McCain, thank you.